There he is. Dreamy as always.
Wait, that's how I'm supposed to describe you. Isn't that how that works? Um, Wonderful. Well, Todd, thanks for joining us. I'm super pumped for us to be talking about the Transparent Sales Leader. I'm halfway through it, and I've been very much enjoying it.
Nice.
So I'm glad that we're sending out oodles and oodles of these because, like, if I was halfway through it, and I was like, I don't know about this, I might feel bad that we're like sending out hundreds of copies. But like now, I'm like high NPS. I have like strong conviction on it, so I'm super pumped. Um, we'll um we'll wait. We'll just like give folks like a couple of minutes to kind of trickle in here. But you've been moving around, traveling at all
A lot.
recently, like business travel? Oh
It's
yeah,
funny. Yeah, I went from
what's the
like
recent thing?
100% virtual to 100% on the road. I was in Boston last week. I was at the Mohegan
Mm,
Sun in Connecticut 2 weeks ago. I saw
oh,
somebody's from Milwaukee. I'm in Milwaukee next Wednesday, so it's. I see Cosrose here too in beautiful Spring Grove, Illinois. So I'm in Palatine, Illinois right now. So
we should have just like we should have had a live meetup in Illinois, like the Elks Club or something, and
the Oaks Club, yes,
in like Buffalo Grove or something.
exactly.
Come on now to like beautiful Buffalo Grove. It'll be amazing. That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get jamming here. I'm super pumped to be talking with Todd about his book because I'm absolute like massive fan of his first book and in the process of becoming a massive fan of his second book here. I think there's a lot of great stuff for folks, for sales managers, sales leaders, folks who traditionally don't get the as much love from a learning and development and kind of like career development standpoint as they should. Um, and this book is all about it. So I'm super pumped on that. We're going to talk just like quick intros really quickly. I'll introduce myself. My name is Pete Kazanji. I am the CRO and founder of Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software. What that means is it's software that helps sales managers like AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers and their leaders use metrics to improve team performance. And so what it does is it continuously monitors dozens and dozens and dozens of KPIs, like AE and SDR KPIs, and then proactively alerts like those reps and their leaders and managers when something is like potentially off or on, about their reps, teams, and so on. And so what this means is that managers can get to coaching insights faster about their reps, and so they can act to improve rep behavior, and ultimately win, which is like, guess what? That's your job as a manager. like you, we're we're here to make our peeps better. And so what and the kind of the coolest thing about all of that is it takes about 2 minutes to set up. So that's a little bit about Atrium there. I'm also the founder of Modern Sales Pros. Started all this when I was, started my last software company in 2010. TalentBim is a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. That's kind of how I got into sales. So that's enough about me. Todd, can you give folks a little bit of your background, por favor, around, and then we'll kind of get into how you kind of got on this transparency journey.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I found MSP too late. I was in my last role, I was the chief revenue officer of PowerReviews, and I was a MSP member, so I was in there while I was still doing that role. But yeah, multi-time
Mm-hmm.
sales leader, B plus rep before that, and I'll tell you why that's relevant at some point. I am a huge behavioral science nerd. I don't know how that happened, but like I don't read current books. I like to come to my own conclusions. So I dig into the research, the secondary research. And then I'm
Mm-hmm.
also a nerd for the history of sales. When cool people are doing cool stuff on the weekends, I'm reading like old 1905 salesmanship magazines. And we were just on vacation a few weeks ago. I was reading 1921 editions of Sales Management magazine, and it's fascinating, dude. But
It
I think
is,
I take
yeah.
nerdery to a new level.
It's super crazy because I think we were talking about like maybe the last time we hung out about how like sales as a as something that people instruct and kind of teach really like there was this kind of like desert or like winter, I guess. And like even if you look at like all the MBA programs and what have you, they all have like marketing departments, which like usually there's like a sales class that's like
Yeah.
being taught. Like there's like a sales class being taught at Wharton. There's a sales class being taught at the Stanford GSB. I think Kelly Breslin Wright from Gong teaches the one at UW, but like it's still like it's not like there's like six. There's like
Right.
a class, which is kind of crazy, especially given the fact
Yeah.
that obviously it wasn't the case in the back in the day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the early 1900s, every university of substance had a sales curriculum, sales program, to the point where in the early 1910s, it was taught in high school. There was 11 Boston public high schools that were teaching salesmanship in high school. And when I use the term salesmanship, that was the term they used. But there was in Boston alone, there was 400 women going through the program at the time. So
Mhm.
it's fascinating to see how it was exploding, went away, and it's slowly trickling its way back.
Yeah. And so you did PowerReviews, you're the CRO of
Yes.
PowerReviews, having been a sales leader and like a sales operations. I mean, and that's where the nerdery comes from, the sales ops piece. And I mean that in the best way possible. Obviously, as a huge sales nerd myself, I even have I have the cup to prove that I'm a sales nerd. Um, so subsequent to that, you wrote the transparency sale, and then of course like the transparent sales leader, which we'll talk about kind of like how that kind of like moved along there. Um, just for kind of folks for context here, this event is being sponsored by Atrium. I kind of mentioned Atrium earlier. Literally, what Atrium exists to do is help sales managers and leaders use metrics to improve rep performance, like to make their management and make their coaching more successful. Kind of the biggest thing I would love to take away for folks, like as we're talking about Todd's book, which is all about like helping people be better and kind of the operating rhythms associated with that. All of that can really be embedded with like data, right, to help people be more effective. And that's kind of why Atrium exists, is to make that as easy as possible. Again, it takes like 3 minutes to set up. You can just a read-only connection to your CRM and you're on your merry way there. So and then of course we've got the transparent sales leader. When folks registered, I feel we have like a few hundred folks who registered. There was like a prompt if you wanted to get a copy of the book. Just had to take a quick disco call with the Atrium team. If you didn't register for that, just go ahead. I think we're going to drop a hyperlink here in the chat, and then you can scan this handy dandy QR code. It's technology, right? You can scan that and you can sign up for that if you want, because and you ought to want, because it's absolutely fantastic. So we can kind of get jam in here on some of the topics that we wanted to get into as relates to the transparency sales leader. So I think like first and foremost, what I'd love folks to understand is like maybe we can start with the transparency sale, which like my desk is covered in books, but like not that one that's like around here in the office somewhere. Oh yeah, there's some. Weird. You have
Yeah,
some.
I got a
Can I have
couple.
one? Yeah, I got a couple. So yeah, I would love for you to maybe share the story of the transparency sale and like how you came to that from your experience at at PowerReviews, and then we can talk about how like that eventually transitioned into the transparent sales leader.
Yeah, yeah. And so what had happened is when I was CRO of PowerReviews, and you could guess from the name, we were in the reviews space, right? So we helped retailers and brands collect and display ratings and reviews on their websites. All of you have interacted with PowerReviews and probably not known it, because it was 1,000 retailers and brands like Crocs and Vineyard Vines, and Jet, like
Uh-huh.
tons of others. We um, worked with Northwestern University a few years ago on a study that was just meant to look at, all right, when a website's acting as a salesperson, what do
Mm-hmm.
people do? Like, how do they interact?
Sure.
And there was 3 data points that came out of that, 2 of which changed my life like could only happen to a nerd. That the one that didn't change my life was that we all read reviews today, right? Like all of
Weird.
you. At the time, it said 96% of us read reviews and we're buying something we haven't bought before that's of medium to high consideration, right? Like not like a
Yeah.
pack of gum, but something that matters. And I never found the 4% that don't. So I guess that was the only surprising thing.
You're just like this. Bye. Well, whatever.
Yeah,
Sounds
exactly.
good.
Let's go. Oh yeah, it's awesome. What happened though is that the 2 data points that really got me wondering were, again, this is when a website's acting as a salesperson.
Mhm.
We're going to talk to the human to human B2B side in a second, but number one was that 85% of you go to the negative reviews first, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
you skip the 5s and go right to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And then the last data point was that a product, and this was across all product categories, some skew higher, some skew lower, but
Yep.
the average for optimal conversion when a website's acting as a salesperson is when a review score is between a 4.2 and a 4.5, meaning
Because you know it's
that you got
legit.
a product right under it, there's negative reviews. Those will sell better than products that have nothing but 5-star reviews. So I looked at that and thought, all right, that's on a website acting as a salesperson. I've
Mhm.
got a bunch of humans out here that are basically positioning our solutions as awesome, 5-star.
5-star. 10
Exactly.
stars.
Right. It's 5.5 stars. Like that's taking
15.
the volume to 11, like Spinal Tap. And I thought, are we actually doing our customers and our prospects a disservice by not doing what their brain wants, which is to get to the negative first? And so we
Yeah.
started trying it, which trying it means embracing what we give up to be great at our core, right?
Yep.
Embracing that, hey, we've got competitors that do certain things better than we do. Our pricing might be a little higher than other companies. There might be something that when they do a Google search, they're going to find that we've screwed up before. Embrace
Yep.
that. Present our solutions as basically 4.2 to 4.5. Let's see what happens. And what happened was freaking magic, like crazy,
Mhm.
where sales cycles sped up. And the behavioral science behind that is we buy when we can predict, not when we're convinced.
Yeah.
And
Right.
if all we hear is 5-star speak, our brain goes, it's not a prediction. And so sales cycles sped up because we're getting buyers to prediction faster. Win rates went up, partially because we were qualifying in deals better and more effectively, and partially because we were losing the deals we were going to lose anyway, just faster.
Yeah.
And then the fun
Faster.
offshoot was we were making it really hard on our competitors to message against us because we were embracing who we were. And so suddenly, between 2014 2017, according to Deloitte, PowerReviews became the fastest growing tech company in Chicago. And I attribute a lot of it to
Right.
differentiating in the way that we sell and optimizing for
Yep.
the brain. And I got to the point where I was like, I care about this profession. I think these ideas can help a lot of people and make people feel good about selling and maybe get sales mojo back. And so I, like a lunatic, quit my job, wrote a book, and the book talks not just through that part, but all right, I get it, Todd. How do we then apply it to our messaging, positioning, prospecting, presenting, negotiating, client success, interviews, interviewing, conventions, like all that stuff? And that's what the first book is.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, one of the ways that I like to describe sales to the uninitiated, and actually maybe this is like a helpful thing for people who have like maybe come up through the wrong type of Kool-Aid. I talk about this in my book, is because my book is like, founding sales is about startup sales, right? And a lot of the times
Yeah.
the people who are like the startup seller is like a founder or a product manager that's like gone into sales, or like fill in the blank. It's also, I mean, it's also gonna be for like first time sellers coming out of Oracle or whatever, and going into startups. And one of the ways I like to describe what salespeople do is that they ought to be consultants that happen to have a predilection for a specific solution, right? And that's really important because that's like one way I like to describe it to people. Another way I like to describe it to people is that like salespeople are kind of like the grease in the economy. And ultimately what they do is like they take like some sort of solution to a problem. It's not to every problem, it's to a problem or a set of problems. What they do is they run through the market, like finding, or their territory back in the day, they run through the market trying to find people who have that problem. Spending time on people who don't have that problem or trying to fit a round peg into a square hole is a waste of everybody's time. And so if you think about yourself as like evaluating fit, like you're essentially a smart particle, an agent of microeconomics, where you're running around trying to find those like square holes to put a square peg in, you're going to be much more successful. And if someone's like, oh, well, I have a round hole, and like obviously it's not beneficial to be like, cool, this square peg is perfect for you. It's 5 stars.
Right.
And I think that really like what this notion of transparency and kind of information transfer in order to allow like microeconomic actors to connect together in a way that's mutually beneficial is really kind of like core, not to get like too nerdy about it, but like core to like market economics, right? And like Adam Smith stuff. And so I think that like, what the transparent sales, the transparency sale, excuse me, does is really kind of crystallize that in a very tactical way for the modern seller, and makes a lot of sense. And and you guys have and you sold a lot of copies, so obviously like people are picking up what you're putting down, so that's good.
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's one little rant that I love to talk about because you triggered it based on like what sales is. Like buyers know more nowadays, right? Like that quote, buyers know more nowadays. We hear that all the time.
Yep.
Well, the funny thing about it is buyers know more nowadays. That's actually a quote from Thomas Herbert Russell's 1912 book, Salesmanship. Like 110 years ago, they were talking about the pervasiveness of information available to buyers and how that was a threat to the future of the sales profession. The profession flourished, right? Fast forward to 2015, Forrester puts out their annual state of sales like advisory report, whatever it was. April of 2015, they were predicting that 1 million B2B sales jobs would go away by the year 2020, and that hundreds of thousands of college-age people would not graduate into the sales profession because buyers know more nowadays, right? And because of the pervasiveness of e-commerce. What happened? The opposite happened. And so to your point about, round peg, round hole, is I believe that the salespeople that have flourished and why the profession has flourished is more information has not been better for buyers. It's actually been worse. It's made it harder. And that salespeople that are able to do the homework for the buyer, the pros, the cons, help them predict, help them get through all of that and build trust in the process. That's the salespeople that succeed. And that's where we get our mojo back too. So more information is not better for buyers. Think through that lens as a sales professional. How can I help the buyer do their homework so they can get to a prediction faster, whether it's with me or with somebody else? Lose fast if you're going to lose. But you'd be surprised that, like, to your point about the round peg, round hole thing, even for what I do, like, I don't teach a prospecting class. I could, but like, I just had somebody last week come to me like, Todd, we want your prospecting class. And I was like, cool.
Call Jeff Blount.
Well, yeah, there's like 50 people that do that. Right. And if you made a list, you stack rank them, I'd come in at about number 47.
Yeah.
I could do it, but like, let me refer you to one of those top 2, because there's some awesome people out there. What inevitably happens is they go, oh, I love that. That's great. But tell me more about what you do. Right. So like that trust that's built through that, like, lose quickly. I'm not going to try to jam myself into a prospecting deal when there's somebody better out there. My goal is the outcome.
Yeah, or alternatively, and this is a really important thing when you're dealing like we are, and a lot of the people who are probably joining us today, when you're dealing in like emergent categories where like maybe the problem isn't well understood, that can be a little bit more challenging because like you don't really have people who are like, I have a round hole, because they're like they don't know they necessarily have the problem, or it doesn't have a name associated. Like, use Atrium as an example. We call what we do data-driven sales management. And so when you think about like, using numbers to help in sales, most of the time people are like, oh, that's like forecasting. It's like, well, no, forecasting is a subset of it. It's an important thing we're going to talk about in the 5 Fs. That's like a subset of this. Or like, oh, that's like analytics, right? Like, like what Tableau and Looker does. Like, no, it's related to that. It rhymes, right? But this is very human centric, right? And so I think, but the same kind of like thing applies, where if you show up in front of somebody and they're like, oh yeah, we're really interested in, I don't know, like analytics or whatever, and then this is what like really quality discovery is all about, and saying, I mean, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what are the problems that we're trying to solve there? Like, last time something surprised you really badly, what was the deal there? Oh, well, like, we had a really bad miss this quarter, and then when we investigated it after the fact, it turned out that like 2 of our 10 reps win rates had like, fallen in half during that quarter. Got it. So it sounds like there was a rep centric issue that we would have preferred to have been proactively aware of rather than retroactively. Yeah, exactly. Okay, wonderful. So let's talk about that versus like, the A word or whatever, analytics. And so, but importantly, not what we're not doing there is like trying to shove a round hole, like a square peg in a round hole there, because if the discovery question comes back and the person's like, yeah, we have a really important, focused initiative right now on like optimizing our marketing channels, right? And so it's like really important for us to understand like the lifetime value of our customers on a per marketing channel basis. Oh, okay, cool. You have a marketing analytics problem. Like you don't have a data-driven sales manager. God bless. Cool. You have a hexagonal hole there. Let's talk about how you can solve that hexagonal thing, right? And I think that that's an important thing. Like even in emerging categories, like you don't want to shove a square peg in a round hole. But you do want to do a good discovery, do discovery. So maybe the person's like, actually, I do have that round hole over here. It just was like under something, right?
Exactly. That's why in the first book, I have a whole chapter that talks about reality makeover TV shows. And like, as crazy as that sounds,
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think through the lens of how reality makeover TV show hosts run their shows, right? It's not they get in front and talk about how awesome they are and all these people they fixed and their NASCAR slide of all the faces of people that they've solved. That would be the boringest show in the history of the planet. What they do in each one of those things is they do a good discovery, like why are we here, what challenges, and then they embrace transparency and really shine through who they are. But then they teach and like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you seen this in your business? We see other companies like yours that are experiencing this and this, and they're like, oh, all right, cool. And then they lead to their solution instead of leading with it. And that's the key argument there for anybody, whether you're small business, just getting started, you're educating the market, or your commodity, is you can differentiate by choreographing your messaging so that you lead to your solution instead of leading with it, through asking great questions and illuminating things that your prospects and customers maybe didn't even know was possible.
Oh my God, dude. As you were talking about that, literally what I'm thinking about is like Gordon Ramsay's, whatever the hell the name of that show is. What is it called? Like Kitchen Shit Show or something?
I was watching Restaurant Impossible last night, as a matter of fact. So it's
right. Or like, what's the other one? A bunch of my A's really like Bar Rescue, because they're
Bar Rescue,
like
same choreography, Queer Eye, Biggest Loser, Extreme Makeover. They all follow that choreography, which is discovery. Why am I here? Transparency, and then teach, lead to their solution instead of leading with it. And that's why it tells a great story. It brings everybody together. And at the end of every episode, they're all crying, like at the Restaurant Impossible one last night. The host, Robert Irvine, was crying with the people that because the guy said, like, you literally changed my life, right? And that's that's an extreme version, but that's what you're doing in the sales profession, right?
Yep, ideally. And I think the interesting thing here is another one of my favorite sales management books is Corey Bray and Hillman Sori's 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach. It's written as a parable, which I really, really appreciate because it's like a great page turner. One of the things that as I was reading it, I remember kind of having this moment where like a manager was like talking with a rep and trying to reveal to him or her what was causing, like what was the root cause of the problem that the rep was running into. The manager kind of knew what the problem was, but wasn't just like coming off the top rep and like, cool, here's your problem right here, you can't close. It was more kind of like, hey, I'm seeing this in the data, I'm noticing this conversion rate problem out of like proposal here, let's talk through that, and like essentially asking kind of provocative leading discovery questions that I was reading, and I was like, this is a disco call. This is a disco call. It's just asking provocative questions and then characterizing like the positive benefits associated with change, like why change, why now, right? Like the positive benefits associated with change, the negative implications of not changing. Oh man, it's going to be really, you're not going to be able to buy that M3. You're not going to be able to pay off those student loans. Like that'll be a super bummer. And so as I was like reading this, I was like, oh my God, sales management is like sales, when well done. And I think that so I would love to kind of understand, because like transparency sales, awesome, set the world on fire. What kind of led you to the transparent sales leader? And then we'll kind of talk about some of the stuff that you cover in the book.
Yeah. So, what really happened was I first got promoted into sales leadership back in 2008. I'm
Hmm.
aging like guacamole here, I know. But what had
We
happened
gotta put some
is
we gotta put some lime on you. Right.
that's right. You ever left guacamole out? Like it takes 30 seconds for it to just
Yeah,
get
30
gross.
seconds. Yeah.
But what happened was, I've always been a methodology philosophy kind of nerd.
Mhm.
In a sales role, I always had a structure. Like I always had a process. I always had a framework, right? Like there's sales processes everywhere. I got books from the early 1900s that are all sales process. I got promoted. Woohoo! Good for me. 48 hours later, I wake up and I'm like, wait a second. I'm kind of like a dog chasing a car down the street. Like I don't have a structure. I don't have
Hmm.
a framework. I don't have a process for sales leadership. And as a result,
Hmm.
I'm just running after the car. And when it turns left for there's a deal at risk. It turns right for I got a personnel issue. I got a recruit, I got an interview. I got a CEO one-on-one. I got a board meeting. Like it was driving me nuts.
Yeah.
Like I guess maybe could only happen to a nerd, but you probably all anybody who's in leadership or thriving or trying to get to that, there is no structure or process that I've ever found. And so back then I created one for myself. And it's simple, it's
Mhm.
alliterative because I'm a dumbass and like I had to make it memorable. But I created a structure for myself that I could say every day, all right, here's all of my responsibilities as a revenue leader. They fall into one of five categories. If I internalize that, first of all, I can see the holes before they form, but I used it for all my planning and strategizing. Like literally, all of you, once I lay out these five F's for you, you could do a 30, 60, 90-day plan in like 20 minutes. And you'll always have one. The whole like, does anybody have a good template for a 30, 60, 90-day plan? That goes away because it's in your brain. But then I used it
Mhm.
for all my one-on-ones, all my communicating up, down, side to side. I used it as the board meeting agenda, used it for interviews, used it for doing due diligence as we were looking to acquire companies, or in one case, when I was on the sales leadership team at ExactTarget, I was asked to do due diligence after we bought a company, which is weird, but I used the 5S for it. But at its core, once you
Okay.
internalize these, if all of you fall asleep afterwards, you're going to be 98% ahead of all other revenue leaders because you have a structure and nobody else does. And that's where it came
Yeah.
from. Over the years, I optimized it for the behavioral science, and then it all sits on a bed of transparency. So it's not like, oh, you should be transparent as a leader. Yes, but this is about the structure optimized by science
Yep.
on a layer of transparency. That's the book.
Yeah. And I think I like how the book is structured, so it kind of like gets into the meat like up front around kind of the five F's, and then it has a bunch of the behavioral stuff afterwards, because I think that's an important thing, right? Like goes back to the the like how management is sales, um and the same way that um people buy from people they like, and they buy for emotional reasons, and then rationalize them subsequently, with like business cases or whatever. But ultimately they're like, I want to buy this so I can get promoted, or I want to buy this so I can get home earlier to
Yeah.
my kids, or whatever. And then of course, like, then you say, and the reason why it makes good business sense is because ABCXYZ, right? And that's an important thing. I think the same is true with respect to like your reps. Like, you can't just come off the top rope and be like, you're going to do it this way because I said so. I mean, you can do it in the short term, right? But you're probably going to have more retention issues than you would have otherwise preferred. And so I really like that on kind of like the back half. I guess I guess it's like business up front, party in the back a little bit, the structure of the book. So that's good.
Well, not really. I mean,
So
when
let's
you
talk.
look at the behavioral science, there's so many things that around each one of these things that if you really think about it,
Mhm.
there's some things that we systemically do wrong as revenue leaders that we just do because I had a manager that did it before and it worked for her, right?
Yeah,
Like that's so often what we do. And if you
worked.
really optimize, like within all of these elements, it's not just the back half, it's like the way we think about our focus, how we
Yeah,
build a team and what tools we use and for why we choose the tools we do. Forecasting is the one that blew my mind that I'm like, now I get it. Like we have systemically done forecasting wrong for 80 years. We used to
Wrong.
do it right 100 years ago. Like there's elements throughout that are taking the optimization of behavioral science into all the pieces. And I just think there's a huge opportunity. And there's things that I now realize that I was doing wrong.
Yeah, totally. And so let's just talk about that. So like I think the 5 Fs that the book kind of talks about is focus, field, fundamentals, forecast, fun. And
Yeah.
so maybe what you can do is just give us like a really quick TLDR
Yes.
on each of them, and then we can kind of like dig into some of them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's basically that, right? It's if you think about all of your responsibilities as a revenue leader, right? And it doesn't have to just be sales. Like marketing leaders use this, and client success leaders, and even CEOs. They all fall into one of these 5 categories. You as a revenue leader have a responsibility, first of all, to establish, maintain, and grow the focus of your team. Like your team wakes up in the morning.
Yeah.
Their most important asset that they can turn into revenue is their time.
Mm-hmm.
Once they lose it, they never get it
Yeah.
back. You as a leader have to make sure that they're working on the right companies, the right opportunities, the right places, the right demographics, the right individuals, the right prerequisites, right? That is your responsibility. Yep. At PowerReviews, I used to call it no science projects, right? Like we know we're great at retailers and brands, and anything else is a science project. And that was part of my responsibility and my leaders' responsibility to make sure that their teams are focused every morning. There's 1,000 companies they can call on. They know which ones they're going to go after. So that's number one. Once you've established that focus, your responsibility is to build a field organization. What team takes the field that supports that focus? So it's the people, the recruiting, all that stuff. Right people, right experience, right places with the right tools and the right resources. Atrium in there, right? Like that's part of the decision making, is making sure that the team takes the field, best team with the right tools, the right resources. Your third responsibility, initially ongoing, growing, is to make sure that that field gets the fundamentals consistently right. And by fundamentals,
Right.
I'm talking about the prospecting, presenting, discovery, qualification, negotiating. You as a leader have a responsibility to know how your team is doing on these things and to grow it and to maintain it and to use resources to help add to that. Your fourth responsibility, always and ongoing, is you got to predict the future through the forecast, right? You've got a responsibility to the metrics, the KPIs, and to be able to predict the future, not only for your investors, but for your resourcing and for future planning. And then fifth, arguably the cheesiest, but I think the most important, and I've dedicated a big chunk of the book just to this, is you've got a responsibility. Like the word is fun, but it's about building a culture where your team is intrinsically inspired, right? Intrinsically, meaning
esprit de corps.
Yeah. If you think your team is coin operated, you're right if you're doing it wrong. That fun is about creating an environment where your team wants to show up every day, wants to stay, wants to do their best, and wants to become an advocate for you and your organization. And that comes through the balance of this intrinsic inspiration, which is about variable compensation becoming the reward for work I love to do instead of the reason I do.
Exactly.
It. And that's the 5 Fs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of like last piece really like is hit on, through a variety of book, like important books in the market. So like, Daniel Pink's Drive, also Multipliers. I forget who the lady was who wrote Multipliers. I'm reading it right now. But like one of the things that and we actually have we have this pitch deck that's used like post discovery, just like 5 slides or whatever, just kind of like frame people's brains, right? Like give them the like, this is this, it's not this. And one of the slides is, we call it the Managers Matter deck. And one of the slides kind of talks about how how managers positively impact the performance of the reps that report to them. And it's a bunch of Gartner stats, but like Michelle Vazana, who wrote like Crushing Quota, did a bunch of research on this as well. I love that book as well. But one of the things that it talks about is like this notion of like discretionary effort, right?
Yes.
Where like there's like the 6th gear, the 7th gear, and people will throw down that sixth gear, they'll throw down that seventh gear if they're pumped, if they're juiced up, right? Like if they have good esprit de corps, if they want to make you proud, if they want to, like, all those sort of things that kind of like great coaches and great leaders inspire in their teams. And so one of the ways that you do that is not through like making their life easy and like giving them a cushy job and what have you, but like, driving accountability, but investing in folks, making it fun even when things like screw up, which is going to happen, right? But like that's like where high performing teams come from. It's not about like, oh well, like, there's a bunch of kombucha in the fridge and and like just come into the office whenever. Yeah. Well, so let's kind of talk through some of these. And so like focus, I think, is a really important one. That's probably why you put it first. Where do you see like some of the, some organizations kind of like falling by the wayside when it comes to lack of focus, and what are things that people should like really look out for there to avoid?
Yeah, and it's funny when I teach these leadership workshops across, like one of the things we do is I lay out the 5 F's and I have the leaders self-score. Like where are we best and where are we worst? Almost 100% of the time, this is number one issue, where you've got reps that have 1,000 companies they could call on, right? If you're focused on everything, you're focused on nothing. Now, one of the things that I'm a big believer in, and this is an example of the behavioral science element of this, I'm a big believer in something I call extreme firmographic focus. That's different than having an ICP, right? Like having an ICP is like, you're thirsty, I could have a glass of water, that's ideal. But I could jump in a pool. There's a million things I could do. Extreme firmographic focus is this, and I'll tell you a quick story. Back in 2008, 2009, I was SVP of sales for this company called Right Hemisphere. We were in the Great Recession. We could call on manufacturers, all of them, right? Anybody who makes stuff. We had come up, me and my CEO had come up with this theory that, hey, listen, if we get to be experts in a lane, and we chose aerospace and defense because we knew we had a couple of companies that there's deals there. They were big dollars. We were winning a lot of them and our cycle lengths were efficient. Let's do this. We went and hired a consultant on aerospace and defense that we brought in that was able to teach our team during lunch and learns what aerospace and defense companies are focused on at the demographic level, like who cares about this stuff, how they're measured, what they read, like become an expert in that. Next thing we did, got a couple of those customers to talk to us about that, right? What are you reading? Where do you go to get smarter about your business? How are you measured? What's top of mind? And then the last question was always, could you show us your inbox? Right? Like you got all this prospecting crap in there. What stands out? And it was amazing that, and then our marketing team, we did case studies around aerospace and defense, right? We didn't restrict territories. What we did is we created expertise on our teams so that when they woke up in the morning, they were like, who do I have that's aerospace and defense? I'm going to start calling them. And the minute they did, those people on the other end were looking at our team as an asset, somebody who could teach them instead of being this evil that's like, we're great. Did I mention how awesome we? And the next thing you know, we get Gulfstream, we get Cessna, we get Northrop Grumman, and we go from struggling to 400% year over year growth. We did it again, and then we sold the business to SAP in 2011. Extreme firmographic focus. Know this, confidence is contagious, right? That when you are confident, the people you are talking to become more confident in you. And if you've got something to add that makes them smarter about their business, not yours, that's when you win. And you can't do it if you're calling on 50 different types of manufacturers, automotive, pharmaceutical, right? Like you can't.
Yeah.
But when you get to be an expert, you're drawn to it. It's that like the recency. Like, there's a bias about like once you start being aware of something, you start seeing it everywhere. And we developed passions around that. There's a couple of reps that worked for me in 2009 that made aerospace and defense the rest of their career focus, which is amazing. But that's something you can do in your organizations.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, what I think part of what you were describing right there is, investing in the field in order for them to understand, like, and execute on that focus. I do think that organizations, especially like early stage, people, this is something that that founders run into all the times, like, oh, like who can use that? Well, anyone can, because it's magic, right? It's like, no,
Right.
that's not how that's like not how this works, and it's not an effective use of anyone's time. And so the crisper you can kind of be around that using extreme, what was it, extreme
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 firmographic focus. Yeah.
extreme firmographic focus, EFF, the better off you can be. And so it's not like, I mean, I see this a lot with our customers, like, oh, who's your ideal customer profile? Like, oh, Series B startups. And it's like, no, you want to be able to be like, cool, it's it's a company that has 1 to 4 data scientists on staff, not 0, not 5, right? 1 to 4 data scientists on staff, and have at least this many software engineers
Right.
in the organization, and and work and like ship these sort of products right here,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, the
Like it's
most
very, very, like
valuable
what's
thing.
in and what's out. Like you can DQ it like an SDR, and then
That's
it
it.
kind of flows through the whole thing. Like, when our SDRs create opportunities, we have like a new opportunity creation field, like notes field. It's like templated, but like they put in there, like the humans, like this many account executives, this many SDRs, this many sales managers, this many sales operations people, because they know what our kind of like extreme firmographic focus looks like there. And if it's over like 20 sales operations people, it's like, oh man, these people are like never gonna like let go. Like
Yes.
they're not gonna let go of their like, their Tableau that they've invested in, ungodly amounts of hours for any time in the next 5 years. So like, kiss them, wave goodbye, and like just don't put it on the calendar, because like there's no way that's gonna like a good use of anyone's time. But then it
And
flows throughout the
systemically,
rest of the
yeah.
process.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that systemically, leaders traditionally have made this hard for reps to do too. Meaning,
Hmm.
there's the old axiom that I used to be guilty of, that, hey, at all times, you need to have 4x your quota in pipeline, right?
Right.
Like we would teach our reps that. And as a result, what our reps do, fill their pipelines with 4x of crap, right? We've
Hmm.
got to get smarter as leaders to know that, hey, listen, I would rather have 2x our quota in pipeline of deals that we're actually going to close. Like, why is it 4x?
But it's
It's
really
dumb.
good.
Yeah. And so,
Right.
like, we've got to create environments where reps have the ability to qualify out. But like I talked about earlier with that whole prospecting thing, where somebody comes to me looking for prospecting expertise, sure, but there's other people that do that better. That it's amazing that not only do we spend our time more effectively, but that endearing trust that's built through embracing what you give up to be great at your core ends up coming back to you in spades anyway, man. Like, embrace that.
Yeah.
That's part of knowing your focus. Does your team know what a yes is, what a no is? And if there's a middle ground of mediums, what are the criteria that are going to push it one way or the other? And this structure, like I said, we used to use it for one-on-ones. And part of the one-on-one conversation with a rep is for the maybes in here, where the rep's like, hey, I got this opportunity here. It's kind of a maybe. Like, let's go through the criteria
Mhm.
of it, right? If we don't have that as a part of our one-on-one agenda, the rep might just go after it, or they might qualify out when it could be a great opportunity. So we've got to create
Right.
systemically management structures that allow for the yes or no.
And let's jump out of order here, because I think it's most applicable right now, and talk about kind of forecasting, because I think
Yes.
it's very, very related, right? Where the historical mechanism by which folks would forecast, and I talk about this in like our my data-driven coaching masterclass around like what's coaching and what's not coaching. Like
Mhm.
what's not coaching is like, make this forecast bigger, Todd. Like obviously that doesn't help
Right.
anyone, versus like, hey, this is looking kind of light, why is that? What can we do about it? Can we do anything about it right now? Are we kind of hosed? Maybe we could have done something about it 60 days ago, but then like the second best alternative is to like now make sure that we're not hosed 60 days from now. Those sort of,
Yes.
like, that's more of a like a coaching approach. And so yeah, maybe we can talk about like the forecast component of this as relates to pipeline coverage, and like commit, and all these sort of things, and how people screw that up.
Oh, dude, you're triggering me, brother. Because there's a couple things in here that are big, right? Like number one, and I'm going to take everybody back to 1992, Glengarry Glen Ross. Now, there's a scene in there where, Blake, which is Alec Baldwin from Mitch and Murray, comes and berates the sales team. If you ever, there you go. Coffee is for closers. I don't have mine. But there's one thing that he got right. Like, if you go YouTube that for anybody who's not seen it before, like last time I watched it, I think I cried myself to sleep afterwards. But AIDA is something that he actually got right. And here's why. AIDA is attention, interest, desire, action. Now, Alec Baldwin replaced desire with decision. He got that part wrong. But 1898, so 124 years ago, Elias St. Elmo Lewis theorized AIDA, that every buyer goes through 4 stages on their process of making a decision and making a purchase. Like, are they paying attention? Are they interested? Have we generated, like, are they desiring this now? And are they ready to take action? That became the basis for every sales process and every sales methodology, every forecasting methodology from 1898 through at least 1940 that I can find. In 1925, in one book, they talk about this idea that every sales philosopher that's worth their salt knows it's AIDA, right? Like, and by the way, forecasting, they used to get it right back then. And here's why. That was always about recognizing buyer behavior. Every sales professional was taught that the sales process is about recognizing buyer behavior. It had nothing to do with your steps. Fast forward to the 1990s when Siebel comes out, and then Salesforce and HubSpot. You open the box. What are the stages of the process? They're all seller focused, right? Discovery, qualification, demo, proposal, close.
Proposal.
No wonder we can't predict, because we're teaching reps systemically that we say, hey, we're buyer focused, but our processes and all the things that reps get endorphins from moving deals along are based on what they're doing, not recognizing buyer behavior. I think forecasting accuracy, first of all, for all of you, is, like, I'm not saying blow up your stages, but you had mentioned this earlier, the why change, why you, why now, and I'd argue that order all day long. At PowerReviews, and we did this a little ExactTarget where I was trying to push it through, but if you layer over the stages, buyer behaviors, that every buyer, AIDA, where do you see that now? Nowhere. But the modern version is that why change, why now, or why you, why now. If you layer that over your stages and you teach your reps to recognize buyer behavior as they go through their journey, your forecast will immediately become more accurate, because you're trying to predict when the buyer will buy. And so that's, like, when we talk forecasting, that's step one. There's an opportunity for you to start to think and drive into your organization's buyer centrism, if that's a word, and your forecast will immediately become more accurate.
Yeah. And I think also a part of this too comes, like, these things kind of like feedback in each other, where if you have better focus and you know exactly who your ideal prospect is versus who's not your ideal prospect, well, then you're not going to end up with like a pipeline that's full of cruft, right? You're going to be able to have you're going to be able to spend good time on good opportunities, which should make your forecast more accurate. What are some of the other things that people, like, screw up when it comes to kind of like their operating rhythm associated with their forecasting kind of like process, if you will? Because this is something that I tell my team all the time, is like, there's kind of 2 components of forecasting. One is like, hey, where are we going to land? Right. And that's like a prediction. That's like an analytics thing. And then the other piece of it is like a process, right? It's a mechanism. It's a recurring thing, which then, cleans data, close dates and forecast categories and stages and what have you, in order to make this thing over here more effective. And so, when people say, like, we call it the F word internally, when people say forecasting, you really have to be crisp. You're like, cool, what are you trying to get better at here, right? So what are things that trip people up?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, the way that we started doing that at PowerReviews, our forecast became over a 6-quarter period, our 90-day forecast, predict first day, what we do at the end of 3 months. We're within 3.5% of our 90-day forecast 6 quarters in a row. And in the book, I lay out exactly how we did it so that you can think through how to do it. But there's 2 things. Number one, and I know this might sound crazy, But one of the things that, like when I got to PowerReviews, there was this legacy approach to how we handled losses, which is if we lost, you suck. That's first. And what they had these processes in place is once a rep moved a deal to close lost, there was a notification that went to everybody on the senior leadership team. And like all of a sudden everybody would come out and be like, hey, what happened? And then once the loss is over, we'd just be like, go get him next time, sport. And that was the end of it.
Yeah.
I think, like, my belief is to flip that, and that creating an environment where you're literally celebrating the losses. Like there was one deal where we did a champagne toast for a rep that lost a deal. Because the opposite was all of a sudden deals like all of a sudden the close date moves out 12 months, or suddenly the qualified deal just moved the suspect and you don't see it. Celebrating the losses because they're already getting hit in their pocket and their quota for the loss, right? Celebrate the effort. But most importantly, we had to create a transparent environment so that reps could really share and diagnose why they lost, so that the other reps can go, hey, I got that kind of situation in my deal. Or, hey, before I go after this kind of account, the most important thing you can do is not lose for the same reason over and over again. And unless you're celebrating losses, your rep is going to blame the customer, and no one's ever going to learn from this. And you're going to keep losing for the same reason over and over again. We found that by literally celebrating every Friday, we'd celebrate a loss. Like it's crazy, but the next thing you know, we're learning from every opportunity. We're cleaning out our pipeline early. We're losing opportunities we're going to lose anyway, but fast, and strategizing on those deals that we can't lose, that kind of fit all the criteria, the ones we keep losing, and get out of them. Like that's number one, right? So that's a huge opportunity. Number two, and I've been writing a lot about this lately. I personally believe that if you're still using the word commit in your sales organization, you're doing yourself a disservice. I believe the word commit is a dirty word because it does a lot more harm than good. There's so many that argue that, hey, listen, as a leader, I got to make a commitment, so why not teach the reps to do it? Well, commit is a petri dish for lies, because your reps that are going to suck, they're going to have a crappy quarter. They're going to commit their number. What are you, crazy? Like, of course. The reps that have a build pipeline are going to under promise because they don't want a bunch of eyeballs on them. It just becomes this thing where if you've got a deal that's committed and it goes south, and you got an old school manager that's like, you committed that. Guess where you go last when the deal goes south? To your manager.
Right.
You got to create an environment where your reps feel good about coming to you. Like, hey, Pete, I know I committed this deal, but the word commit makes me not want to go to you because I committed to you. I made a commitment to you and I'm going against it. You got to get that word out of there so that reps feel good about, like, hey, Pete, this deal's going south. Let's strategize on it versus, hey, I'm going to try to solve this myself, and then I'm going to come take it to Pete after the boat already left the dock, right? And so get rid of that word commit because it's doing a lot more harm than good.
Yeah, this is something that and I think there's like kind of two things there as well. Like, look, the like as a sales leader, like you kind of have a portfolio approach. So say you have 10 or 20 or 30 reps or whatever, and I don't know if you're much of a baseball fan, Todd, but like, it's very difficult to commit, like, I'm going to get a hit in this at bat. Right. But as a player, and I know that I've got like a 275 average, because I'm above the Mendoza line, I can probably commit that I will get, I will get 27 hits out of 100 at bats. Right. It's very difficult for me to say, like, I'm gonna get a hit in this at bat. I'd probably be like blowing smoke up your ass. As a leader, similarly, you have 10 players and like 100 games or whatever, right? Like and so I think that it's important for people to kind of to say, like, in sales, it's a game of probabilities where, you try to control the controllables, and as soon as you start trying to make things that are probabilistic instead deterministic, or what is the joke in in Star Wars, like only the Sith deal in absolutes, right? Um, like all sorts of like unpleasant things start to happen, and so I think it's just like important for folks to be mindful of that. And so the way that we do this in our sales team meeting is we don't talk about like deals that are like we're committing for that week or whatever. We talk about like our intentions, like because say you got 30 ops or you got 40 ops or whatever, it'd be nonsense if you're like, oh yeah, like any of these 40 could close. Like that's scary, right? Um, versus like, hey, these are the 5 that are kind of like hanging out around the hoop right here. I think these 2 are gonna pop. These are my stretches here, and you're setting your intention there. Is there like a downside if like those 3 who weren't around, like hanging out around the hoop, like if they push to next week or maybe to next month or whatever? No, it's just like sharing, like it's helping give visibility to leadership and also others, right, around like the things that are kind of like marching their way down the funnel,
Yes.
but without the kind of like false determinism associated with like a commit, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, I come from that e-commerce world where you're looking at consumer behavior based when they're left on their own, what happens. And it's part of the argument for why I put why now at the end instead of in the middle from a purchasing and forecasting perspective. Because let's imagine you're an e-commerce provider. Every time somebody puts something in a shopping cart, you commit it. Look at the data.
Right.
Over 60% of products that are put in a shopping cart are abandoned there.
Yeah, I know.
Right. So we can't commit even when a customer says, yes, I put it in my cart, right? Like we can't. We know that 9 out of 10 deals where the contract's ready for signature are going to close, but 1 out of 10 won't. Like stop with committing the things you commit to, right? And make an environment where we are feeling good about the deals that we lose and learning from them, and an environment where we're coming to the manager first when a deal goes south instead of last.
Yeah, exactly. So like I'll give you an example. So back on that forecasting thing where there's like the process of forecasting and then there's like the analytics of forecasting. There's a lot of stuff that like you can do around here that organizations like don't like. They could have this process, nailed up where it's just like, pass it along and like kick some things out and whatever, and like be piss poor at this over here. And so one of the ways that our customers use Atrium for this is we actually have, one of the hundreds of metrics that are in Atrium is what we call win rate weighted pipeline. And literally what it does is it allows you to look at somebody's pipeline on a close date basis, like, this month, next month, month after that, whether it's a team or an individual. And what it does is it essentially, like, rather than weighting it based on like, some arbitrary percentage that somebody puts into the CRM, it literally weights it based on the historical win rate of that individual rep for that stage, right? Like, and that's different on a per rep basis, right? Like, this is Mr. Happy Years over here. He only wins 70% of his ops that go into contract because he's like crazy. He's like DocuSign McGee, right? And then we've got this rep over here, right, where like 90% of her opportunities that are in proposal close win. Well, like, let's use that information in order to make judgments about all of these ops and their various, their various stages. And again, it's a probabilistic way of approaching it, where it's like, hey, you've got 10 ops that are in proposal right now. Like, which of those are you committing? It's like, well, I feel good about these ones, right? I mean, first of all, they wouldn't be in proposal if I didn't feel good about it, right? Because like they asked me, because it's buyer centric. They asked me, they asked me for pricing. They asked me to put, I didn't just like shove one into their inbox. They said, hey, you know what, Todd, this sounds really compelling. I would love to hear a little bit more about like what this might look like from a commercial standpoint to get started. Wonderful. I would love to get that together for you. Right. Exactly. So approaching it from a more probabilistic standpoint can be very, very impactful, again, because like ain't no one saying like, hey, all 10 of these are going to close, right? Like, I know that I'm not going to get a hit in every single at bat, because that's just not how this works. Right.
Exactly. That's it.
Todd, unfortunately, we only covered three of the F's here. Maybe you can kind of like, we use the rest of our time here, our kind of parting shot here for for fun and kind of the focus on that and how that kind of like layers across everything else.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the book, I go through a model. I call it the praise model, but there's 6 categories of things that drive us intrinsically to show up, to do our best, to stay, and to become advocates for us and our organizations. And the praise, I'll rattle them off fast, but you'll have to dig into the book. But we do our best when there's predictability available, right? Uncertainty is a crazy maker for us. Recognition, which is like status, validation, feedback. The A is aim, which means that our work matters beyond just our forecast, that we're making an impact. There's a mission. The I is independence. We do our best work when we're not being micromanaged. We're given the tools, the resources to do our best work. The S is security, which means we do our best work when we feel safe, when people have our back, when we've got a association and relatedness. And then the E is equitability. Nothing erodes engagement and intrinsic inspiration faster than politics and feeling like somebody else is getting paid more, getting promoted more, getting more favoritism for doing the exact same job that I am. And so the fun really digs into the praise model and then gives you some counterintuitive ways to optimize each one of those things that there's a couple in there that I think are going to be some big head slappers. But I really dig into the fun because I think it's so important.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good parting shot for us. I mean, Todd, thank you so much for joining us. If folks want to get a copy of the Transparent Sales Leader, we're going to drop a link here for you to sign up for that. Just go ahead and drop your details there. You can also scan that that QR code. If you haven't, if you already have the Transparent Sales Leader, but you haven't read the Transparency Sale, we also have oodles and oodles of those as well. It's red, not purple. You can get them both. Like they're very pretty together. You can we're going to drop a link on that as well, and folks can sign up for that. So yeah, both of those links are here in the chat. So whichever one you want to get, or both, just go ahead and hit that link, and we'll get you set up there. So Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to chat through this. I'm really grateful for the time. I'm sure everyone will be really stoked on reading up on the rest of the 5Fs. So I'm kind of glad that we left some hanging alongside a lot of the behavioral science stuff to make sales organizations more effective. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you soon. Okay.